Thank you so much for the kind introductions. I'm really happy to talk about my research here in this IBS seminar. So today I'll be talking about, as shown here, the quantum metrology with strongly interacting spin systems. Basically, this work is done during my PhD program at Harvard, and I'll be talking about some new concepts introduced in the field of quantum sensing and metrology. So to begin with, let me actually stress that there has been a remarkable development in the realization of many-body quantum systems, as you can see here. So very remarkably, there are actually a lot of physically different platforms that can perform in a fully quantum mechanical fashions. And then as you might know already, or as you are already familiar with, these kind of quantum systems, and the goal of this development of this quantum system is basically to outperform the classical the counterparts, basically classical computer for certain applications. And these quantum applications include the quantum simulation or quantum computation, where a quantum device can solve certain problems, some certain computational problems, much better than the classical computer. And also, this quantum sensing is a very promising field because these quantum systems can detect very weak signals very efficiently using purely quantum phenomena, such as like entanglement and linear kind of superposition. And also, in the field of quantum network and quantum communications, it is also very important to study how we can store and manage the quantum information in a reliable fashion. So basically, when you create this quantum mechanical superposition state, you want to maintain these fragile superposition states for long times. So today, I'll basically mostly talking about the quantum sensing. This is one of the powerful quantum applications based on these so-called nitrogen vacancy centers, which are the color defects you can find in the solid state in diamonds. So before I begin the details of my previous work, let me briefly introduce some basics of this quantum sensing. So basically, typically, when we work on these quantum systems, we mostly deal with the two-level systems, which we call the qubits. So here, this qubit can be represented as kind of spin, this kind of arrow up and down. And for example, because you have these two quantum degrees freedom, so basically you can associate this kind of spin down state as 0 state and the spin up state as a 1 state. And typically these quantum states, these two-level systems have different energy energetic difference between these two states, 0 and 1. And more importantly, when there's some like signal that you want to detect, this can perturb this energy separation between the states. So basically, when you have some sensing some signal, any signal from the surrounding, this quantum system can experience this energetic shift between this 0 and 1 states, characterized by the small omega. So more specifically, for example, if you have prepared a superposition state of 0 and 1 states, if in the presence of this kind of some signal, and this will lead to this energetic shift, therefore it will lead to the dephasing, the relative phase difference between 0 and 1 state. And then you can see that this small t is basically denoting the interrogation time or the sensing time, as you will. So basically, you can see that there's some time-dependent linear the dephasing happening in the presence of signal. So therefore, if you can detect this kind of dephasing caused by this external signal of interest, then basically you can use this simple scheme for your applications. And this ranges from really this covers a really large number of different fields, ranging from this nanoscale NMR, studying this chemical composition of sample, to even to like biology, studying some interesting the magnetic properties of living animals. So by the way, feel free to interrupt if something is unclear during my talks. I'm happy to answer. So yeah, so now this slide, I'll also, so to elaborate a little bit more about quantum sensing, so let me explain how this quantum sensing protocol works in general. So as I said earlier, these kind of two-level systems or qubit can be very effectively visualized on this so-called Bloch sphere. So you can see that this capital S is basically representing the quantum states. And this small b pointing downwards is the signal that you want to detect using this quantum system or the qubits. And first step you will have to do is basically you have to prepare your qubit into a no kind of desired the state. So typically you can initialize your qubit into 0 state or 1 state. And then you are applying a resonant control pulse in order to change its quantum states into these superposition states. This is kind of state preparation step. And then because of the presence of this external signal, as I said earlier, this the spin or the qubit will actually undergo this precession along the z-axis. And then this precession angle phi is basically equal to omega t. So basically this relative dephasing between 0 and 1 states can be captured by this precession angle phi in this representation. And the goal of quantum sensing is basically to read off this phase accumulation phi. And in order to actually get access to this phase information, you actually apply another control pulse to bring this phase information into, or to change this phase information into a population difference between the two states 0 and 1. As you can see that this phase term now appears in both in 0 and 1, they're like quantum amplitude. So if you repeat this kind of the protocol like multiple times and gather the statistics, then basically you will learn the probability distribution or the probability of measuring 0 and 1 in this way by after these repetitive measurements. So therefore, you can see that in the presence of the sensing signal and for a given time, and depending on the signal strength omega, so basically this probability of staying in the 0 state will vary in a sinusoidal fashion. So basically by measuring this probability over time, you can detect this small omega of interest. And more in particular, this small omega, this energy shift is proportional to the sensitivity of a sensor, which I express as a gamma sensor. And for example, for this gamma is commonly called as a gyromagnetic ratio of your sensor. And this capital B is again the magnitude of a sensing signal. So it's very clear that if you have larger signal, then you will undergo faster evolution. And if you also have a sensitive sensor, then it also leads to a faster, larger sensitivity. But what's important here is that you can see that this phase evolution time t will also determine the sensitivity. So basically, if you want to detect very weak signals, so you want to wait for long enough time such that you can see this phase evolution. So therefore, you want the challenge of this quantum sensing is that you want to maintain or achieve this long evolution time. So therefore, that's the kind of key to achieving the good sensitivity for this quantum sensing applications. However, in normal conditions, when you just naively evolve your quantum sensor in this way, because of the presence of the other type of unwanted noise and imperfections, actual kind of coherence time or the evolution time will be limited because of finite coherence time of your sensor. So people have actually extensively studied how to actually extend this quantum coherence time in order to fight against this unwanted noise and decoherence sources. So one idea of obtaining the longer coherence time is to use the so-called dynamical decoupling techniques. So basically the idea of dynamical decoupling is pretty simple. So basically you apply a resonant coherent control to your qubits. So you do, for example, like fast driving of your sensor such that you can decouple unwanted noise, but still capture or maintain the sensitivity to a desired signal or the signal of interest. So therefore, you can actually achieve a long coherence time and also maintain the good sensitivity to your target signal. So one popular example is called the spin echo or the CPMG in this nuclear magnetic resonance society. And the pulse sequence we apply to sensor is really simple. As you can see here, for example, if you just apply a single pi pulse, so basically if you rotate the spin state by 180 degree, you can actually extend coherence to time as compared to the case where you don't do anything. And also you can also increase the number of pi pulses, which is characterized by this alpha term in this exponent. And in this case, you can further extend this coherence time because basically you do the fast driving of spins, and then it will actually keep extending your coherence time as seen in this figure below. So in order to understand better how this decoupling works, actually I took this photo from Wikipedia, and then some of you might be already familiar with how this spin echo pulse sequence works. But if you see this dynamics, basically what happens is that because of this pi pulse in the middle, you can actually refocus any dephasing that happened during this first evolution. So basically by flipping the spin, any like phase diffusion will be refocused at the end of the evolution. This is how you can retain the good quantum coherence just by applying a single the flipping pulse. So this is the basic kind of the idea of how to extend quantum coherence for increasing sensitivity of your quantum sensor. So is there any questions so far? Okay, if not, so let me now switch gear and explain the basically sample, our quantum sensor that I used. So I'm actually interested in these MV centers in diamonds because these MV centers can actually operate at room temperature and also exhibit very good quantum phenomena and showing a very good coherence even at ambient conditions. For example, here this is showing the lattice of the diamond, and these gray balls are the carbon atoms, and you can see that the one carbon atom is replaced to a nitrogen atom. And if you can create a vacancy right next to this replaced nitrogen atom, this NV forms a kind of molecule in diamonds. And then if you actually look at the energy structure of this artificially created kind of molecule, this NV center, then actually it exhibit this quantized energy levels in its ground states. So basically these energy levels are located inside the band gap of diamonds. The diamond has a large band gap, and then inside of this band gap, you have this kind of additional the energy levels coming from these MV centers. So here you can see that MV center is actually the spin one system, the spin triplet. So you have actually three these discrete quantum states labeled as 0, -1, +1 states. But typically, these -1, +1 states are degenerates, so they overlap to one another. However, and these -1, +1 states are split from the 0 state via some crystalline field. So usually they are split, separated by a 3 gigahertz energy scale. So it's kind of microwave domain qubits. And then in order to only utilize the two-level states, what you do is that you apply a static magnetic field of like 100 Gauss. Then it will actually split this -1 and +1 states via the Zeeman shift. So therefore, now you can actually drive the selective transitions using a resonant microwave, defining effectively two-level systems. And more in detail, like if you now look at the detailed energy level diagram of this quantum sensor or MV center, it looks like this. So in the ground state, it forms this effective, two-level system, 0 and -1. And then this energy separation is like 3 gigahertz, this microwave domain. So it defines qubits. And then that's where we actually do this kind of, control and use this kind of like quantum degree freedom for sensing applications. And on top of that, in order to get access to the spin state in the ground state, we actually use this laser. So for example, if you shine the green laser, and depending on the spin state you are in, for example, if you start from the 0 state, then basically if you follow this green, this green laser will pump the population from the ground state to the excited states, and then give some fluorescence in this wavelength range. So it emits the red fluorescence in this wavelength range and goes back to zero state. However, if you start from the -1 states, basically it undergo the spin non-conserving transitions, and it goes to these kind of dark states, these metastable states, and then goes back, goes to actually the zero state, not the -1 states. So basically you can see that if you shine this green laser for a long period of time, then basically you can initialize your spin population to the zero state. Basically this green laser acts as an optical pumping field. And then as seen here, as I kind of like briefly explained here, if you start from the zero state at only a time when you shine the green laser, it will emit the red photons depending on the spin states. So therefore, if you can read the photon counts within this wavelength, then you can actually determine the state of your quantum object. So you can kind of read out the qubit states. So this is how the MB the center can be used for these quantum applications. So this plot, actually this MB center is not the only sensor for this metrological applications. So here actually I'm summarizing all different sensors for this magnetic field sensing as a function of their sensitivity and also spatial resolutions. So overall, you can find that for these kind of different sensors, there are always kind of like trade-off between the sensitivity and spatial resolution. So if you want to like read off very localized signal, the sensitivity gets kind of worse. So MB center is kind of atom-like the point defect in diamonds. So it has a very good spatial resolution. It's a kind of nanometric scale sensor. However, you can see that the sensitivity is poor as compared to the other sensors, the macroscopic sensors. So the natural question is, how can you improve the sensitivity of MB center, this localized sensor, while keeping this good spatial resolution? So one idea is to simply increase the density of this the MB sensors. So basically, you create a large number of these MB sensors within the same probing volume, so that you can utilize this kind of like statistical averaging in parallel, so that you can suppress the signal to noise ratio because you have multiple sensors. Then your kind of resulting sensitivity will get improved. So this is basically the idea of achieving a better sensitivity using this localized sensor. And to this end, our actually Japanese collaborators, they actually fabricated very unique and special sample which we call the black diamonds. So this is kind of this black stone is actually diamonds, but the color of the sample is black because of presence of large number of defects, because they will absorb the light and the color will be changed to black. And microscopically, as I zoomed in here, we expect that we have a large concentration of these MB centers. And we actually estimated the average distance between these MB centers, and then they are expected to be like a few nanometer range in this particular sample. So basically, we can kind of now achieved this dense quantum sensors, and then we want to do this quantum sensing with these ensemble sensors. So let's see how the sensitivity of this ensemble quantum sensor scales as the density of this kind of like quantum objects. So as I mentioned briefly, so basically the sensitivity is expected to scale.
Joonhee, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure, yeah, of course.
If you go back one slide, please.
Yep.
Right. So your spatial resolution, of course, will also get worse, I think, right? If you make a large ensemble, then you cannot claim anymore that you have the spatial resolution that is your atomic scale sensor, right? But then let's say if you have 1,000 sensors in your dense ensemble and they are 5 nanometers spaced from each other, then you will have a worse spatial resolution, right? So
yeah, it'll be, yeah, precisely speaking, it'll be shifted a little bit to the right, but it really depends on the probing, volume for your, applications.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so indeed, that's true. So usually, because we are using light, this is visible light for quantum sensing. So our probing volume is anyway limited by the optical resolution, few hundred nanometers. So basically, you can think of our kind of minimum sensing volume is a few hundred nanometer cube, because it is anyway limited by the diffraction limit of your microscope.
Mhm. So
Yeah,
are you
but
thinking about having the sensor on a tip, like an AFM tip, or is this are you thinking about having your sensor in a bulk like crystal?
yeah, so in a few slides later, I'll show you that show you our sample, our real sample. Here, I'm just showing you the first the bulk sample, but in the end, we actually carve out the nanostructure out of these bulk diamonds to basically confine the probing volume.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I'll show you in a bit.
And another question though, I mean, if you make that many NV centers, I presumably you have a lot of other defects too, like just vacancies or just nitrogen atoms as well,
Correct.
right?
Right. So they all kind of contribute to as a kind of like, so I'll explain more details, but they contribute as a kind of dephasing source because, locally, each individual MB centers will have like different environments. And then these kind of paramagnetic impurities, the other defects can also interact with the neighboring MBs. And it will, influence, for example, the energy level of individual kind of MBs. So which we call as a like inhomogeneous broadening. Yeah. So I'll talk about it more in detail in the later slides. Okay, so coming back to this kind of scaling plots. So basically, naively, you expect that the sensitivity will scale as a 1 over square root n being the number of spins. But we are actually kind of probing certain volume. So if you normalize by this probing volume V, then you can see that the sensitivity will scale as 1 over density of your spins, this 1 over root density of spins. And then this kind of like scaling is commonly called as a standard quantum limits. However, you can also expect that when you actually keep increasing the spin density, at certain point, these different quantum objects start to interact with one another. So there will be some crosstalks. So if you look at this formula, this sensitivity actually not only scales as the density, but also it is also determined by the coherence time that you can achieve in these ensemble sensors. And in fact, this coherence time, which I label as T2, will actually be limited by the density in this high density regime. So in particular, in 3D sample, so T2, this coherence time will be proportional to 1 over rho. So they will actually cancel out. So that's why you will see only the saturation in the resultant sensitivity when you increase the spin density. So the natural question in this case is that, so can we actually decouple the interactions, these crosstalks between different sensors, such that we can still follow the standard quantum limit and then keep improving the sensitivity. So that's the kind of main goal of my projects. So how to decouple interactions between the quantum sensors such that we can still improve the sensitivity in these ensemble sensing schemes. So the question is basically, as I said earlier, we want to turn off the interaction so that we can maintain good coherence time for these sensing applications. But the real challenge in experiments is that there are also other problems. For example, as Andre mentioned, so in this kind of solid state sample, each MV center is surrounded by the different environments. So it will cause some, basically you can think of them, very complex energy landscape. So therefore, each individual MV centers will experience the different energy shift, even without any sensing field. And on top of that, when you apply these pulse sequences for extending coherence time, you also expect that this sequence can have some control adders, so which will also limit the coherence time of this ensemble sensing. And also, in reality, when you apply these pulses, it also has finite pulse durations. So within this kind of finite pulse duration of these control pulses, these quantum objects can still interact with one another. And then you can have some residual, some unwanted interactions, also which also cause coherence time to decrease over time. And at the end, so we care about this quantum sensing most importantly. So therefore, we want to keep in mind that we still maintain the good quantum metrological sensitivity while doing this kind of interaction cancellation and dealing with this kind of experimental imperfections. So with that, so let me now show you our experimental apparatus briefly. So here you can see that our sensing kind of setup is pretty simple. So as a proof of principle demonstration, we actually prepare this black diamond sample on top of this microwave waveguide here. And this microwave guide will provide this control pulse sequence for these MD centers to extend coherence times. And beneath this kind of the microwave guide, so we have this objective lens, and we shine the green laser onto these black diamonds to read off the spin states of these ensemble sensors. And as I mentioned earlier, even by naked eye, you can actually see the red light coming out of these black diamonds because of large concentration of these MD centers. And we also characterize the most important energy scales of this spin system, which are basically the on-site disorder. Basically, when you probe the resonance of this electron spin resonance of this sample, the transition of this resonance will be broadened because individual MD center will experience a slightly different energy shift. And also we characterize the interactions between these MD centers. And then that's how we can estimate the average distance between these MD center, which is around like 5 nanometers. Okay, so so using actually this black diamond sample, so as I briefly told you, so we in actual experiments, we fabricated this nano beam with this triangular cross section where the dimension is 100 nanometer, such that we can have a good spatial resolution as well as good uniformity of spin control. So basically, when you apply this microwave, all the MD centers within this localized volume will experience the same magnitude, such that they will experience the good quantum control fields. And then you can see that we also apply external magnetic field for demonstrating our sensing schemes, which is highlighted by this yellow line. And we shine this green laser and also count the photons in these red wavelengths to read off this external signal we apply. So this is the diagram. So any questions so far? So I'll now move on to a slightly different topic.
So are you actually measuring in transmission as you indicated in the last slide, or are you measuring with just one objective lens?
So we just use one object lens, and actually we read off the reflection, not the transmission. Okay. Yeah. So you shine the laser.
In general, I mean, it's just easier, I guess. But does that make a conceptual difference?
No, you can actually have two objectives to double the photon counts. In principle, you can do that. But in our current experiments, because of some space limitations, we only have one bottom objective, and then read off the reflection. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in principle, you can double the collection efficiency if you use this kind of double objective configuration. And then our objective is high NA objective, oil immersion objective, so that we have wide angle to collect photons, just to mention. Okay, so now, so let me actually switch gear to how to actually design an ideal pulse sequence for quantum sensing applications. So let me actually explain the kind of big picture for this kind of pulse sequence design. So basically, when we think of like quantum dynamics, we typically talk about Hamiltonian. And then Hamiltonian, for example, if you consider some evolution under Hamiltonian given by your system, so it will create a kind of quantum states characterized by psi. But when you want to do certain quantum applications, you have to consider the system's own Hamiltonian, because different systems have different Hamiltonians. Therefore, for targeted Hamiltonians, you'll have to design different approach or different pulse sequence to achieve your goal of applications. So the question is, can we actually dynamically engineer the given system Hamiltonian such that even though you are starting from the fixed parent Hamiltonian given by system details, if we can engineer or transform the original shape of Hamiltonian, then it'd be kind of very flexible and convenient and powerful. So so basically the goal of this Hamiltonian engineering is basically we want to generate some targeted Hamiltonian H target independent of the system Hamiltonian, such that you can always generate some targeted wave function by this approach. And one popular example for this quantum control is to use this periodic pulse control. So for example, spin echo sequence, which I showed earlier, can be understood as one example of such dynamical Hamiltonian engineering in some sense. So let me elaborate a little bit more about this dynamical Hamiltonian engineering technique. So in this kind of technique, we basically think of applying some set of pulses in a periodic fashion. So this is kind of commonly called Flock engineering. So basically you define some set of pulses with some base period t, capital T, and you apply the same sequence iteratively, say n times, and then your quantum state, initial state, will be evolved under this sequence. And then usually when you think of quantum dynamics, we are actually thinking about the evolution of quantum state itself. However, you can also think about the same dynamics in an equivalent fashion by thinking about operator transformation using this Heisenberg picture instead of state evolution. So in that sense, instead of like changing the state of quantum object, you can think about the same evolution by considering the operator transformation. So for example, in this first period, so basically you are starting from the given system Hamiltonian, the H1. And then when you apply pulse, basically you are changing the Hamiltonian into another form in this Heisenberg picture. So in that sense, in the second free evolution period, you will have different Hamiltonian, H2, and so on. So basically, on the right-hand side, what I'm showing you here is that basically the multiplication of this different system evolution driven by these different Hamiltonians in this representation. So basically, you can kind of understand this right-hand side. But what's more important is that when this capital T is very short, so basically if you do the fast driving of your spin system, then actually you can find a time-independent effective average Hamiltonian that describes the entire dynamics with the time equal to n times this base period T. So basically, if you just consider the leading order of this average Hamiltonian, it is simply the weighted average of these different Hamiltonians defined in different free evolution periods. So therefore, basically, for this any quantum applications, if you want to generate certain target wave function, you can think about corresponding time independent Hamiltonian. And then if you want to achieve this target Hamiltonian, you can now ask for the inverse problem. So how can you generate this targeted average Hamiltonian using some pulse sequence? So this is kind of the goal of dynamic Hamiltonian engineering. And this technique has been kind of extensively studied, in particular in NMR. However, so far, most of pulse sequence design is based on the assumption where you assume that these pulses are ideal and perfect. So basically, individual pulses are assumed to be perfect, so there's no control errors. And on top of that, their pulse duration is kind of 0. So you are kind of considering the instantaneous rotation of this kind of quantum states. But in reality, because of the experimental capability we always have non-zero final pulse duration, and also we can have rotation angle errors because of calibration errors. So therefore, if you just naively apply some pulse sequence given by this NMR society or literature, it may not work because of some errors induced by these experimental imperfections. And therefore, you can think of, so therefore it's not surprising to have some error terms in this engineered Hamiltonian labeled as this delta H. So the question is, how is there a way to cancel this erroneous term using some robust design for pulse sequences? So for example, when you because you are anyway applying a set of pulses in time, so you can maybe imagine a situation where one error happening at all your times can be compensated at later time by the other pulse. So basically now we are interested in developing a kind of self-correcting robust pulse sequence to achieve the target average Hamiltonian even in the presence of this experimental imperfection. So that's the entire the goal and objective of my the project. So first of all, to see this kind of how this dynamic Hamiltonian works, so let's consider the simplest example of spin echo sequence. So now we'll think about the quantum dynamics purely in this operator transformation picture, this Hamiltonian picture, instead of state evolution. So for example, in this first evolution period, you are basically starting from your original Hamiltonian. So now we consider ensemble of kind of spins. So therefore, you have this kind of Hamiltonian, and then we assume there's no interaction. So this small h captures the basic small energetic difference between different states or different spins at different locations. And if you apply the pi pulse in the middle, so what it does is that in this Heisenberg picture, this original Hamiltonian will be flipped because the z operator will be changed to minus z operator. So if you now recall the leading order average Hamiltonian, that is basically the summation of these two different Hamiltonians. And this will lead to a zero. And you can see that this disordered field induced by environment will be canceled out. So that's why the spin echo sequence can lead to extension of coherence time by decoupling disorder in this picture. And what we actually realize in this representation is that actually this pulse sequence can be understood easily just by following how the spin operator transforms in time. So basically, now you can describe what the spin echo sequence does just by purely using the frame transformation or the operator transformation. So for example, in this first period, you only have a z, you start from the z operator with a plus sign. So in this new representation based on a matrix, you can fill in +1 in the z frame and fill in the 0 in the x and y frame. And in the second free evolution period, because now the z operator becomes minus z operator because of the pi pulse in the middle. So you have -1 in the z axis because the you have minus z operator in the second frame. So therefore, what I take home message here is that you can actually think of some dynamics induced by pulse sequence based on the simple matrix representation with 0 and ±1. And the reason why we adopt this new representation is because now you can actually understand what a given pulse sequence does if we use this new representation on the right. For example, on the left, this is kind of conventional way of drawing any pulse sequence. For example, it consists of like multiple rotations. It's pi over 2 and pi rotation around different axes. And if we just follow how the operator transforms in time, so basically here we start from the z frame and then it goes to y because of this pi over 2 pulse, this 90-degree rotation, and it goes to x and so on. And now you can visualize this frame transformation using this matrix, and then you can see some structure in this pulse sequence. And then here, just to help you understand better, so I colored the +1 as a yellow box and -1 as a green box. And immediately, if you now think about average Hamiltonian analysis, you can see that the Z operator plus Z operator occurring in the first frame get canceled by the minus Z operator in the last frame. And similar for the other Y and X axis. So basically you can think that you can now see that this pulse sequence, once represented by this matrix, can decouple the disorder field because you see the same number 1 and minus 1 in each axis. And at the same time, what you can see is that this plus 1 and minus 1 travels equal times across all the different axes. What this means is that, for example, if you had a ZZ interaction, some two-body interaction in the first frame, this will transform into YY interaction because the Z operator will become the Y operator in the second frame. So in the first frame, you have ZZ, and in the second frame, you have YY, and in the third frame, you have XX. So if you now think about average Hamiltonian again, because now you are symmetrizing this direction of operators, so you achieve this the dot product of the spin operators. So just by analyzing how this plus 1 and minus 1 appear in this matrix representation, you can immediately derive the effective engineered average Hamiltonian under a given pulse sequence. For example, the first line is a generic form of many-body Hamiltonian that can be applicable to a wide class of Hamiltonians. And then you can see that how this Hamiltonian will be transformed under a given pulse sequence if we use this kind of matrix form. So you can actually immediately derive the bottom line without using some cumbersome derivation. So is everything clear so far? Okay, so this is basically, so far I've been only talking about the case of ideal pulses, but as I mentioned earlier, the important thing we have to keep in mind is that in real experiments, we have control errors and imperfections. And in fact, if you now consider these finite pulse rate effects and then do some derivation, then we indeed find these erroneous Hamiltonian terms, which consist of a large number of unwanted terms, ranging from disorder, some like residual interaction terms. And in fact, the power of our new representation is that if you now use this matrix representation, these complicated error sources can be very readily visualized using this kind of methods. So basically, you can actually diagnose whether your sequence is robust or not robust against those type of errors. So for example, so this is very powerful because, for example, if you design a pulse sequence or if you're given a pulse sequence, then now you can re-express this sequence using this kind of our representation, these yellow and green boxes. And these different error sources or imperfections, so their presence can be actually summarized simply by some sentences. So you can actually set up some certain rules to check whether you have all the different kinds of errors in your pulse sequence. So by analyzing this, box diagram and then going over this list, you can check the robustness of the pulse sequence. So in other words, you can actually we can actually design the simple rules in order to cancel these erroneous terms in the presence of finite pulse duration and also control errors. So using this kind of simple rules, so what we tried is that we actually can generate the random pulse sequences numerically. So we actually generated more than like 10,000 pulse sequences using this kind of algebraic matrices, and then numerically simulated their resulting coherence. So basically, you using some small number of quantum spins, basically few spins, you can actually solve the many-body quantum dynamics and check the coherence times. And then we can go through this robustness checklist for the generated pulse sequences and look at whether there's some correlation between coherence time and the robustness of pulse sequences. And indeed, if you sort out those numerically generated pulse sequences according to their robustness, you can find that overall robust pulse sequences give rise to better coherence times, as you can see here in this histograms. So we actually, after this extensive numerical search, we actually found the best pulse sequence, basically giving the longest coherence time. And then this looks like this. So it looks very complicated in the left frame because it's combination of the pi of 2 and pi pulses. However, if you look at this, our representation, it has certain structure. So basically, you can see that this -1 + 1 appear in a kind of periodic fashion. So it will cancel the disorder. And also this -1 + 1, these blocks will also appear the equal times across these X, Y, and Z directions, meaning that we are symmetrizing or the neutralizing the effective spin-spin interactions. So we, after finding out this new pulse sequence, we wanted to try this to this black diamond sample where we have like ensemble of interacting MB centers. So here the sequence B is the best sequence we found from this numerical search. And we also intentionally added the sequence A, which is robust against disorder interactions, but not robust against the control imperfections and errors. So when we actually do experiments and read off this coherence of ensemble sensors, you can find clearly the enhancement in coherence time when we use the best sequence found from this numerical optimization. So indeed, this XY8 sequence is the kind of conventionally used pulse sequence for this quantum sensing applications. And compared to this XY8 sequence, we indeed find the 5 times improvements in resulting coherence. And so far, I've been only talking about extending coherence time, but actually when we find out this new pulse sequence, we kept in mind that we want to use the same sequence for quantum sensing applications. So in order to understand how quantum sensing works in this under this complicated sequence, so let's consider this pulse representation.
Joonhee,
So for example,
I have a question about what you said so far. So if I understand you correctly, you are always using either pulses in the X direction or the Y direction, and it's either a 90-degree or 180-degree rotation, right?
Correct.
So you're limiting yourself to a certain subset of possible ones because you could also rotate around any other, whatever 45-degree axis or something like that, and you could also rotate by 45 degrees or 30 degrees. So there's more possible solutions that I could imagine. But I could also imagine that those are all equivalent somehow. Maybe you can prove that this is all the same. So could you comment on that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So far we've been actually exactly restricting the type of pulse sequence to the set of pulse sequences that only have pi over 2 or pi rotations with X and Y phase rotations, so that we can map this pulse sequence, this frame transformation under this pulse sequence using this matrix, because otherwise you cannot assign this 1 and -1 or this green and yellow colors in this 3-row diagram. Mm-hmm. But indeed, there could be some sequences that outperform our best sequence if you now loosen this constraint, but we haven't checked it yet, those possibilities.
So there is no, as far as you know, there's no general whatever theorem that says that if you do what you're doing here, that's the best you can possibly get. I mean, it could be better, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it could be better. So I think it's hard to prove that there's no way to actually there's no way to prove mathematically that, these pulse sequences, resulting coherence times are basically, the same as what you can achieve from more generic cases. I think it'd be very, very difficult to prove. Okay. Yeah, but at least you can maybe check numerically, but I'm not so sure. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so coming back to this quantum sensing protocol, so what you can find is that if you look at this diagram, so first of all, you can see that this plus and minus sign alternates periodically, and they're actually phase matched across all the axes. So what this means is that if you have some AC sensing signal going through this in time, and then if you tune the pulse spacing, such that it is equal to the period of sensing signal of interest, then basically the phase dephasing due to the sensing signal will accumulate in a coherent fashion, because this sensing signal phase and the sequence phase are basically matched to one another. So in other words, the sensing sequence will be resonant when to a signal that has a frequency of 1/2 tau, tau being the pulse spacing. So indeed, the better way of seeing this resonance is to just apply the Fourier transform for this time domain oscillation of this plus and minus ones. And then we can find that there's a strong peak at 11 megahertz for the given tau. And then from the fact that this X and Y and Z axis are phase matched to one another, so they're like signal will constructively interfere and giving the very high strength at the desired frequency. And then the height of this this peak is basically is determining the sensitivity of your sensor. So one important thing that I want to mention is that in this complicated the pulse sequences, what we realized that we also need to change the sensor's initial states. For example, in this conventional sequence where you only apply the pi pulses, basically 180 rotations, in the this average Hamiltonian picture, this AC field will be seen as a kind of DC field. And in particular, in this conventional case, from the fact that your frame only stay in the z-axis because you're only applying the pi pulses, so therefore the DC field will appear in this average Hamiltonian picture along the z-axis. So what this implies that you have to prepare your quantum sensor orthogonal to the z-axis. So that's why for conventional quantum sensing protocols, you always initialize your quantum spins or the quantum sensors on this equator, the superposition state. But in contrast, under our new sequence, from the fact that our frame can travel to both X and Y directions on the equal amount of time, because we are kind of symmetrizing the interactions. So therefore, in this average Hamiltonian picture, this AC field pointing along the z-axis in the left frame get transformed to different directions as a DC field in this average Hamiltonian frame. So because we are kind of traveling, symmetrically for all the different axes, this DC field will appear along the 1, 1, 1 direction. So in order to maximize the sensitivity, we actually have to initialize this sensor on this kind of tilted plane. And then indeed, when we do this sensing, this sensitivity or the drop in the sensing signal is maximized when you initialize your spin in this kind of tilted plane. Basically, this 1, 1, 2 direction is where the kind of characterize the position corresponding to this tilted plane. And we proceeded to demonstrate more systematically how sensitivity is determined under our sequence. So here is the benchmarking result of our case, our sequence against the conventional one, this XOA8. Indeed, when you change the magnetic field strength, basically if you look at this kind of 0 point, you see the larger slope in your signal contrast. So this means that you have larger sensitivity under this new sequence. And then once you can characterize the sensitivity at this kind of the steep slope point, and then you can also check the robustness of our pulse sequence by intentionally imposing some control adders in your individual pulses. So for example, you can see that the resulting sensitivities are kind of uniform, independent of the rotation angle adders that you can have in your control pulses. And this dashed line is basically the limit if you don't decouple the crosstalks or interactions between the MB sensors or quantum sensors. So this actually results, this sensitivity, actually we find that our sensitivity is kind of the best value reported so far, at least among solid state electron spin sensors. Okay, so with that, I'd like to conclude my talk today. So today I kind of explain how you can think about this Hamiltonian engineering in generic situation using this kind of the simple matrix consisting of 0 and -1. And there's a like one-to-one mapping between this representation and actual conventional representational pulses. And we actually demonstrated the powerfulness, the power of this new design framework for these quantum sensing applications using MB centers. So with that, because of the limited time, so I'll skip the outlook. And I'd like to thank my colleagues and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your nice talk. Any questions from the audience? We started a bit late, so I think we'll give this at least 10 extra minutes for some discussion. If you have time, Joonhee, if it's getting very late on your side.
Oh, it's okay. I'm happy to take questions.
Just from my side, a very simple question. This is all at room temperature in atmosphere,
right? At room temperature, at ambient conditions, and then we just have like simple confocal microscope setup. Yeah, and then we prepare this nanofabricated cantilever structure to confine these high density sensors within a few 100 nanometer volume, and then we detect sensing signals.
This is cut to specifications, or you simply just like break pieces off and you pick a good one? How do you get the tiny pieces? This one exactly. How do you get those?
Yeah, it's a bit tricky. So I don't have a slide here, unfortunately. But what we do is that we do this FIB technique to etch out surrounding surface, and then you can actually create this kind of like cantilevers, array of cantilevers. And then what we do is actually we use these kind of tungsten tips to break the both edges, because you're just using a piezo stage. You kind of approach the end of the cantilever, and then you can break it. And then due to the force, the electrostatic force, this cantilever will be attached to this kind of tungsten tip, so that you can transfer this individual cantilevers or this nano beam onto the microwave structures that you created, for example, here. So you can think that, maybe you can forget about this bulk sample. So we bring this kind of tungsten tip where you have this kind of nano beam hang on at the tip of the, this tungsten tip. And then we kind of bring this sample down. And then because of the, presence of this glass substrate, this microwave strip line, so it'll be, attached to the bottom. So we can actually prepare this kind of nanobeam sample in this way.
So the sample you show here, this is like several millimeters or maybe even like half a centimeter, something like this, right?
Right. So this bulk sample is like few millimeter kind of sample. Yeah, but in actual sample is like few hundred nanometer, I think 100 nanometer and 20 micrometers. Yeah, initially, actually, like this sample was made for the application of like cavity QED type experiments, like the quantum memory and so on. So that's why we fabricated this kind of, as a kind of nano beam, so that you can kind of couple in some light at the edge and then detect some fluorescence the other edge. Yeah, to use it for the other applications. But unfortunately, there are some like other technical challenges. So we only have so far demonstrated the quantum sensing applications, but there might be, some potentials in the future if we can improve some property of this MB sensor, ensemble sensor. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have a simple question. I think you talk about rotation errors. What if there is a big error in initialization? I mean, if we are not start from ground state, but a certain mixed state, your theory also works?
Oh, that's also a good question. And then if you actually start from the like imperfect initial states, then actually it will lead to a reduction in the spin contrast. Because basically in this quantum sensing protocol, as I showed at the beginning, so this is kind of protocol. So if you had some error in this preparation step, and then when you read off the probability basically, so in ideal situation, after normalization, the signal should oscillate between 0 and 1, but initialization error will cause this contrast of oscillation to be limited, say like between 0.1 to 0.9. So it will lead to like reduction of the spin contrast, thereby leading to the reduction in sensitivity. But it won't affect any,
So coherence time.
Sorry, so I think there's some connection issue.
Joonhee, I can jump in for a second here. So I also have a question here. Are you initializing in a pure state here? I mean, mostly a pure state, or are you initializing into a mixed state?
So yeah, we are initializing into a pure state because, as I said earlier, so you are basically starting from like completely mixed state to begin with, but we shine green laser for say a few microseconds. Then like this optical pumping from this 532 nanometer will actually initialize all the qubits into the 0 state. So you can actually prepare the pure states with the help of this optical pumping of the green. And then this, this pumping actually efficiency is very good, like higher than 99%. So purity of your, is pretty good.
So you can quantify this and you can say that, let's say 99% you are in the pure state.
Correct.
Great.
Yeah.
Just from the curiosity, so as you told, it will be initialized first, but as time goes on, because it will be summarized and the higher state also could have some population. So how long does it take usually?
Yeah, so that's basically the main kind of like goal of this applying this pulse sequence, because coherence time will be decreased because of the interaction. So in other words, it will lead to the thermalization of your system. So actually, like thermalization is caused by, like just to clarify, caused by two things. The one is basically the intrinsic interactions between spins. This crosstalk can actually lead to the thermalization within the spin system. And the second, thermalization actually comes from the coupling to the environment. For example, the defects are inside the diamonds, right? Solid state. So the phonons, for example, can actually induce the decay of your quantum signals. And this is commonly called a T1. And then T1 time is actually currently at room temperature is 100 microseconds, which is longer than T2 that we have achieved so far. So T2, is like 10 microseconds here.
Yeah, that's very clear. Thank you very much. So can you explain one more time that maybe I could understand very clearly? So always here, in my point of view, then the most ambiguous the time is the pulse application time. So during the pulse applications, then the quantum states will change continuously, I would say. Then that time scale, how can you deal with that time scale? Because delay times can be handled quite exactly, but for it always, I think, depends on the Rabi rate.
Right, that's a very good question. So here I just show one, example. So typically this pulse duration is set to 20 nanoseconds, a few tenths of nanoseconds. The Rabi frequency in our system is like 10 megahertz level or like 20 megahertz. So basically TP here is like 50 nanoseconds, for example. And actual evolution time for sensing, basically full evolution time is a few hundred nanoseconds, for example. So that you can detect like 10 megahertz signal. So microwave duty cycle is pretty high because you can see that pulse duration is like 50 nanoseconds, and the free evolution time is 100 nanoseconds. So almost like 1/3 of time is occupied by pulses. So therefore, it is very critical to consider the effective spin evolution during these control pulses. And then I skip the details, but you can kind of analyze their effects. And then you can see that overall, this kind of unwanted Hamiltonian or the effects is proportional to the pulse duration, TP. And there are like various kind of imperfection terms. And then all of them can be actually effectively visualized by this kind of representation. And then it looks complicated, but you can actually write down simple rules. And then you can find that you can check one by one whether your pulse sequence is robust to disorder or not robust to diagonal interaction. You can kind of like check one by one what would be the dominant error sources for your given sequence. So that's why you can check these kind of boxes. And then if your given sequence or design sequence doesn't satisfy all of them, you basically can conclude that your sequence is not ideal and robust against those kind of errors. And then to ease this kind of like, process, we can, because now you can write down these rules using simple mathematical, equations, you can numerically, not only numerically generate all the, different, pulse sequences represented by these matrices, and then go through this kind of like rules. Then that's how we can actually find this kind of best sequence numerically.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I have one more very small question? Can you go forward? Can you go forward?
Very
more?
short, Suyon.
Yeah, very short. It will be very short.
Andreas is waiting, I can tell.
Yeah, one more, maybe. Yeah, here. So here you actually draw one sine wave at the bottom side of the pulse sequence. So putting the kind of pulse across the zero crossing point of the sine wave also, does it have some kind of clear meaning to eliminate that effect? Or?
Oh, sorry. So what's the question? These thin lines?
Yeah, placing the center of the pulse at the zero value of the sine wave. Does it have some?
That's very important because when signal is like positive, right? That's where you want to intentionally dephase your sensors because you want to detect these sensors. That's why this kind of like, one part of sine waves is aligned to the center of the one box. Because if you do like some, some shift, then sensitivity will be lowered. Because like phase accumulation will not be, largest.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. Are there any further questions? If not, then
yeah. Can I ask you one question?
Oh, okay. I have to close more quickly. I'm always too slow. Please.
This is a good question. So you try to cancel all the errors and then some particular interactions, and if you have some real ideal process sequence and then cancel all the error, then the theoretically, can you expect that the coherence time could be infinite or something like that, or you still have some theoretical limit?
Yeah, so the fundamental limit will be the T1. So basically limited by the coupling to the environment, such as phonons. But from the fact that our coherence time is not saturating this T1 time, so here you can see that it's roughly 10 microseconds. So there's still room to improvements, but we haven't figured out how to improve this systematically. So probably the next step for improving this pulse sequence would be to consider the higher orders in this Hamiltonian engineering, because today when we actually design a pulse sequence, we actually consider the leading order these Hamiltonians. So basically, which is the summation of individual these Hamiltonians in different evolution periods. But however, there are actually higher order, like independent average Hamiltonians, which might come into play in reality. So if you can capture, or if you can come up with some pulse sequence that considers the higher order terms, that might lead to a better coherence time.
So the theoretical limit should be the T1, and then, okay, I see. Good, thank you.
Yep.
Very, very quick question. So, Joonhee, how many spins do you estimate you have in your detection volume here for these experiments?
So we estimate it to be like 10 to the 5 spin, like qubits. So as I said, so the average distance is 5 nanometer. So if one dimension is like 500 nanometer, for example, you roughly have like 100 spins all on one axis. And then you have like 3 axes, X, Y, Z. So it is like expected to be close to 1 million. So if we do careful, math, then it is expected to be 10 to the 5. And then we can confirm this by just counting measuring the fluorescence, because we know the fluorescence coming out of the single MV, and then theoretically it should be just n times that value. So you can actually derive the effective number of spins using the simple comparison in photon counts.
Thank you.
Okay, the end. Thank you very much again for your talk. And yeah, I hope as traveling becomes easier these days, more and more, then I hope we can have you over here at QNS if you're visiting Korea. Then
Yep,
please
I'll
do let
visit.
us know.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Okay.
Let's thank our
Thank you very
speaker
much.
again, and have a good night in your case and good day for us.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you very much for inviting me again. Thank you. Have a good day.